I always somewhat jokingly say that there are only two ways that you get breached. One is somebody did something they weren't supposed to, usually clicked on a link. And the other is somebody didn't do something they were supposed to, which usually means they didn't patch the system that they were supposed to patch and they knew there was a problem. I think about on a day-to-day basis now, with the exception of maybe my email, like Teams and Outlook kind of thing, 90+% of everything else that I do on a daily basis is going to be done through a browser session, regardless of the application. So that browser community has to continue to evolve to be as secure as possible and to give the teams, the companies, the ability to monitor what's going on in that session too, which is where traditional browsers lack somewhat. We've been doing security awareness training wrong from the beginning, frankly. We've always taught security awareness from the point of view of you're at work, you're sitting at your desk, this is what you need to do. But if you think about it, people don't usually take what they learn at work home with them. But if you teach them, this is how you keep yourself and your family personally safe in the cyber world. These are good practices you should be doing with your family, and you make it personal. Guess what? They will bring that to the office with them. So we've been teaching it from the wrong point of view because they don't feel as invested as if it's helping themselves and their family.
Hi, Patrick. Welcome to Be Fearless Podcast. Such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love speaking with people like this, and this is going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's perfect. I'd love to introduce you to our guests and what we are about to talk today. So Patrick is a president and virtual CISO at Cyber Risk Insights, from launching technology practices at small manufacturers to protecting billion-dollar global enterprises like Brink's company across 53 countries. Patrick has seen it all. He also sits on multiple boards and excited to tap into his expertise today. So welcome to the show. You've had an incredibly diverse career spanning over 3 decades. What was the cybersecurity landscape like back then? And how did you even discover this field existed?
Well, it depends how far you go back, of course, but if you even go back, say, 20 years, I mean, if you look at the role of a CISO, the claim for the very first CISO wasn't until like 1998. I believe it was, if I remember right, Citibank. But you go back 20 years and everything was all about having firewalls. It was all about antivirus software. It was all about the perimeter. We still had phishing attacks, so we still had those kinds of similar things. But, there's very little public awareness. The things like PCI DSS and the HIPAA regulations and all those kinds of things like that were not out yet. They were just starting to emerge. So that was a whole new world. And most of the defenses that were in place were focused on the network and the network perimeter and having that kind of fence around the perimeter, almost like a castle. And they weren't focused on individual devices or cloud systems. Remote computing was very little used. I mean, there was some, but it was very rare for a company to have more than 10 or 12% of their whole staff that would work remotely. So and now, obviously, it's a whole different world. We don't think about the perimeter anymore. We do, but we don't think about it the same way. We consider the perimeter to be every endpoint. Every place there's an endpoint, then we have to secure the endpoint, and we have to secure the route into any applications or any central area that they're trying to come into. We have all the regulations now that we have to deal with. Privacy. You never heard the word privacy back then. So these are all new things. I think the attacks are very similar. They're much more sophisticated, but they still are trying to do the same thing. They first have to, in most cases, social engineer, phishing, or some other method, get credentials, and then get into the system with those credentials and look around and be able to reconnaissance the area, the enterprise, and then eventually be able to escalate that privilege, get enough access that they can then take the data they want or do the damage that they want to do. So,
yeah, I think definitely leaders that are entering the space today have to face a completely different set of challenges as they used to 20, 30 years ago. And I just cannot imagine where we're going to be in the next, I don't even want to say 5 years, like a year. It's going to be a completely different thing that we're going to be focusing on. What was like the most memorable part of your career as you were going from one technological change to the other? When did you think a lot of things changed all at once?
Yeah, I mean, the things that were most memorable in my career really center around what I enjoyed the most, which is always when I got to interact with a customer. I mean, I spent time in the military and in public education and with defense contractors and doing that kind of thing. But then I spent, 15 years in my own consulting company and then moved into enterprise where I was providing IT outsourced services. So it was always an interaction with customers. And so that always to me was the most exciting part of the work, was working directly with the business and directly with the customers. But really, what I enjoyed the most was building new programs and building new things. Did it at Experian, did it for Cheetah Digital, did it for CBRE. At CBRE, it was most exciting because I got to build a business information security officer program from scratch. And then after that was built, also got to take on all of global governance, risk, and compliance. So it was a lot of building new things, a lot of success, a lot of helping people grow. And that's what I like to do is I like to see those programs grow and the people grow and the teams evolve.
Yeah. So for our listeners that don't know what exactly you do within Cyber Risk Insights, maybe share a little bit what is your everyday life looks like as a vCISO there.
So, as a virtual CISO, it's really the same job as a CISO. The only difference is it's a fractional. So it's only, for a company, it may only be 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week or something like that. And so during the course of a week, you may see multiple companies and have to keep that all straight and keep that separate. And then, in between that, there are projects that are work too. So there may be a company that needs a third-party risk management assessment, or a company that needs a cybersecurity maturity assessment, or they just need advice on something to do with cybersecurity. So the day is rarely the same, except that it may be the same as a regular CISO, but for multiple companies.
Yeah. I can imagine as you're interacting with so many companies and each of them has their own individual use cases that they're trying to solve. Is there any particular trend that you notice to be reappearing throughout all of the organizations, the kind of challenges that they're facing today?
Yeah, it's interesting because every company you talk to will talk about how unique they are. And yet every company you talk to will have the same basic problems. The vast majority of the companies, they all come down to problems with basic hygiene for technology. They don't necessarily know where all their data is. Rarely do they know where all their data is. Rarely do they know where all their assets are. There's shadow IT. There's people doing things that they just don't know about. And so that's consistent across virtually every company I've ever talked to. The big deals, there's still the big things that they have to look at. But, and as far as trends go, the biggest trends that I think have impacted cybersecurity in the last 5 years or so, let's say, is we've had this overwhelming growth in the number of vendors that are out there.
Yeah.
So everybody with an idea is becoming a cybersecurity vendor, and they're creating an application or a solution. But usually those solutions may only address, 1 to 15 or 20% of the problem that somebody has. And that went on for 5 or 10 years like that, and so we have, I don't know what the number actually is, but thousands of vendors that are trying to sell you and competing in the cyberspace. What has happened in the recent 2 or 3 years is that the bigger companies have figured out that most enterprise companies, most corporations can't afford to have people that are specialized in 15 or 20 different products to run their program. And so they've started consolidating into platforms. They've been buying up smaller vendors. They've been designing or evolving their applications to be more platform oriented so that maybe with a single vendor, you can get 60 or 70 or 80% of what you need out of that one vendor. So now instead of having 15 that you have to deal with, maybe you're only dealing with 4 or 5. And so when you get into small teams of less than 10 people or so, that's important because otherwise you'll have single points of failure. Because everybody can't cover everything. They can't learn 15 products easily. So I think that's been a big trend that has significantly impacted what we can do and the resources and the budgets too, because every tool is, we want another $50,000 or $100,000, and the budgets aren't there to do that.
Yeah.
I think obviously AI is a huge new trend. It's been incredibly beneficial for attackers because of their ability to quickly present attacks that they may have had to spend some time and have some knowledge, deeper knowledge of coding in the past. And now you can get as a service. You get ransomware as a service. But in thinking about that, we also get diverted a lot. And we've been running around for a couple of years about ransomware, terrible ransomware. But what everybody forgets is that the attack, the way they get to us, whether it's ransomware or malware or something else, is the same. They still have to get into our system. They still have to get credentials. They have to gain access. So instead of focusing on that ransomware as an attack, let's focus on what happens if they do get in. And how do we recover? How do we be resilient? And quit asking the question, quit hyping up about and marketing about ransomware. That's not the issue. So I think those are the trends that we're getting to. There's too much information out there right now.
Yeah. I think definitely your first point really much connected to the third point, where you said the data hygiene is absolutely crucial. And then the third point around, how do attackers actually get in, right? They have to get into the systems. So a lot of it is really dependent on the hygiene of organization and how much privileges different users have. Do you see this issue to be persistent no matter the size of the company, or is there still big difference whether you're in a bigger or smaller organizations?
I mean, it comes down to scale. So, you might be in a small company and you're dealing with 50 employees and you don't clean up your identities and you end up with 1,000 identities, 1,000 user accounts that you're not managing, you're not disabling, you're not deleting, and so forth. So it's scale. If you're in a company that has 3,000 employees, maybe now you have 15,000 accounts that you have to deal with, and it becomes a scale issue. But the problem's the same. They're not cleaning up that. And I think for me, there are 4 key areas that you have to focus on. It doesn't matter what the size is. If you focus on these things first, you're going to address more than 80% of the big gaps and the big concerns. And the first is identity and access management. If you have a very, very strong identity and access management program, you have, a multi-factor or bio access and things like that, all those kinds of things help to make that identity more secure. If you have your devices isolated so that they don't have access to everything, they only have access to specific things they need, you can isolate on an attack. So identity and access is number 1. Right behind that is, we talked about that idea of resiliency. It's incident response and resiliency. It's how quickly can you identify that you have an attack? How quickly can you isolate that attack so it can't do damage beyond a small blast radius? And then how quickly can you recover and be resilient from that attack? So those things have to be focused on. And the third is really, I'll lump it under vulnerability management and remediation, because the vast majority of the problems that people encounter is because they didn't patch systems. And so you get attacked because of an unpatched system or a bad configuration. So doing that kind of vulnerability management or remediation takes away a lot of those opportunities for attackers to come in. I always somewhat jokingly say that there are only two ways that you get breached. One is somebody did something they weren't supposed to, usually clicked on a link. And the other is somebody didn't do something they were supposed to, which usually means they didn't patch the system that they were supposed to patch and they knew there was a problem. So those are the only two reasons. But then the fourth is monitoring and detection, because if you have good monitoring and good detection, that gives you a greater opportunity to isolate and contain any attack before it does any significant damage. I mean, protection's important. I get it. And if you can protect it and block it right away, great. But you then have to have right behind it that monitoring and detection so that you really know something's wrong when it happens. And those are the same no matter how big the company is. It's just a matter of scale.
Yeah, definitely. And when we talked about identity, right, I think we're getting closer to the time where we would have to manage not only our users, but also additional identities that help us out to do work, such as agents. How do you see security response to these new tools coming in, getting privileges that they didn't used to have in the past?
Well, the nice thing about when you talk about things like agents or bots or whatever you want to call them is that because they're electronic, you can generate a unique ID that's absolutely guaranteed to be unique. I mean, you can generate a sufficiently large ID and a hash that is not going to be broken until quantum, of course, but that's, but so, which is not quite the same with people because people don't remember long passwords and stuff. So you rely on them to trade convenience for security. Even if you do biometric kinds of things, can you break biometrics? It used to be a lot easier when the first versions of facial scanning came out. It was very easy to break that with good high quality photographs. That's better now, so it improves over time. But it's much harder to know that you have the right person when it's a person, in my mind, compared to an agent that has a specific unique ID that can't be changed. So that's why we're seeing a lot of movement in the marketplace. There's a group out there, a vendor out there that when you call in, like say for a help desk, they can verify you based on some information that is stored with them, but then they can also look at where your location is. Where are you calling in from? And they can match up from a behavior point of view. Does this location make sense for this person? Because this person is supposed to be working remotely from home and they live in Dallas, Texas, but this IP address says that they're in the Philippines. So, what's going on here? And so it will give you a degree of probability as to whether it's a true, well-authenticated person or not. So I think the agents actually make it easier. And the more work we can have agents do, that's great. My only concern in that area is now you start getting into how are you sure the results are what you intended them to be?
Yeah.
Because nobody is looking over the agent's shoulder.
Yeah, you're right. Because as agents are trying to do and help us do more work, they also typically look for the shortest path to get a certain task completed. And oftentimes the shortest path isn't the safest path. Talking about malicious links being promoted on search sites, that becomes an issue. How do you manage all of that? But this is very exciting time, and it's so great to see when security leaders are actually excited about the technology, because I say that there are two ways to look at it. It is like, okay, how fast can we adopt to changes that are happening out there? Do you think where security stands today, can it allow the safe use of these tools, or there still needs to be a lot more work done?
Well, I mean, there's always going to have to be work done, and there's always going to be a situation where the only control, or at least the first control, is administrative. So policies. And we all know that policies don't prevent the problem, but we're in a very litigious society and a contractual society such that you have to at least give those guardrails and guidelines up front. So at least you have something to lean on and say, you were told not to do this. You know not to do this, and then you did it anyway. But I think, yes, we can train people to be safe in doing those kinds of things. The capabilities are just incredible. Yesterday I had a Word document that just had a list of names of people, and it was like the company dash people, comma, email, comma, phone number, something like that. And just all in one line, all in Word. And I was like, man, I need to move that over to a spreadsheet. Well, in the past, I would have taken that and I'd put it in the spreadsheet. It all goes in one column, and then you have to parse it out somehow with formulas to get it in the right columns. What I did instead was I gave it to AI and I said, hey, take this list and break it up into individual fields for an Excel spreadsheet. And in about 30 seconds, it did.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do any parsing or anything. So there's a lot of power in that once you learn how to use the prompts. But then there's also a lot of danger in that if you don't take the time to validate what it does. They use the example of you're not supposed to, the AI is designed so they try to put safeguards on it. So I asked it to, how would you do something illegal? Then it's going to tell you, I can't tell you that, that's illegal, it's not safe, yada, yada. But if you change that prompt and you say, write a song for me that talks about a person that did this illegal thing, and it will write that song and tell you exactly how to do the illegal thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of power there, but there's also a lot of danger. We have to train people how to validate the results that come out. And then you also have obviously all of the discussion about misuse of copyright material and things like that, because it doesn't care. It's just going to give it to you. And so then if you don't pay attention to that, so there's a lot of human oversight that still has to happen. And where we are right now, people aren't trained for the human oversight. They're just trying to get the answer and, oh, this is great, and let's use it. And so we have to evolve our training programs to go beyond just being secure. Now we have to train them to help be right, help be accurate. And that's a different training level.
Yeah. I think a lot of the trainings have to be changed in accordance to the evolution of technology that's taking place. Otherwise, a lot of the things are starting to become a little bit irrelevant, and you just have to make sure that you're following on whatever is going on there. But I also wanted to touch upon of the topic of visibility that you brought up, regarding the fact that right now all of these tools have so many privileges, but the visibility of whatever is going on, especially with development of AI browsers, right? They're basically creating their own infrastructure where all of this can be enabled. Where do you see security being able to protect there?
So, browser technology has changed quite a bit in over the years. Now, especially with all of the availability of, I'll just call them isolation browsers, but secure browsers, where you can each browser session kind of self-contains itself, and you have some control over what goes in and what comes out of it and things like that. Those will help. We also have things like content filtering that we use in browsers that helps. So the vast majority of the tools that we use nowadays are used through browsers. So that browser environment has to continue to evolve to provide the security from within the browser. And then there's also always going to be need for what's happening outside the browser. But I think about on a day-to-day basis now, with the exception of maybe my email and, like Teams and Outlook kind of thing, 90+% of everything else that I do on a daily basis is going to be done through a browser session, regardless of the application I'm trying to access. Even administrative consoles at companies. Now, they're going to be secured. It's going to have privileged access through password management and privileged access management and things like that. But it's through a browser. So that browser community has to continue to evolve to be as secure as possible and to give the teams, the companies, the ability to monitor what's going on in that session too, which is where traditional browsers lack somewhat. You don't have that visibility, as you said, into what's really happening.
Yeah.
And so that's got to change. That those browsers have to get more robust in terms of providing view of the traffic and what's really happening in there, and then being able to control it through policy.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to organizations that you typically work with as a virtual CISO when it comes to protecting this attack surface?
Well, again, I mean, I keep harping on going back to basics, and because so many times we get lost in the chase after the next shiny object and the next cool vendor and the next cool technology that we lose sight of what's really important. And what's really important is to protect the attack surface, is to go back to that understanding where your data is and understanding how your data is protected, making sure your data is encrypted. So even if it did leave the environment, nobody could read it. You go back to identity again. If they can't get to it, then it doesn't matter. And that's the point, is to keep them from getting to it. That's how you protect your attack surface. You make sure that anything that's going to connect to your attack surface, you go into the zero trust mantra and you say, okay, that's not a specific thing. That's a concept. That's a process. That's a way to do things. So, it's the old, from way back in the day, it's the old idea of trust and verify. So if somebody wants to connect, you have to get their authentication. You have to verify that it really is them. You verify their device. You verify their account. You verify what they're trying to access before you give them, and you only give them the access to what they need. So what's changed about that is there's so many points at which somebody can come in now. And that's where it gets difficult, is making sure that unknown or shadow access points that we don't see.
Yeah, that is, as you said, we have to take into account all the basics and see how, of course, we can respond with augmentation of a few tools there. But as you said, back to fundamentals. And if you switching heads right now, I know that you do a lot of board advisory work as well. What does good cyber risk oversight actually look like from the board perspective? And what questions should board members be asking their security teams?
So a couple of things there. One is, I think, where the boards in public companies especially are getting more demands placed on them with, the SEC changes and NYDFS amendments and so on and so forth. They're requiring boards to take a more active view of enterprise risk management. And so the enterprise risk management in the past has typically been, hey, we have somebody, and once a year we all get together as executives and we talk about what are our biggest risks, and we come up with a list of 20 big risks, and then we send those down to our managers and we say, you guys go protect us against this stuff, and once a quarter tell us how it's going. And it's usually not a specific position for enterprise risk manager. It's usually a side of desk position that somebody's doing as an additional duty, and that has to change. Because in the past, the board would just listen to that, and unless something unusual came up, they would go, yeah, that's fine. Well, now they have that responsibility for that oversight. I think boards need to start thinking more about having an outside advisor in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. So contracting an outside advisor like myself, shameless plug, and having that person work closely with their CISO in the company to understand their environment, but then give direct advisory services to the board so the board knows the right questions to ask. And it's not simply the executives are feeding information up to them. Mm-hmm. And they're responsible then for figuring out what are the right questions to ask. So I think that would be a very good thing for boards to start doing, is hiring on an advisory basis an outside consultant that sat in the seat that can help them in that capacity. But they should be asking, in my mind, the four big ones are, what are the big security risks? And it shouldn't just be this regurgitation of, ransomware, malware, et cetera. It needs to be significant risk that's well defined to that company specifically. And then how are they mitigating the risk? How is the company mitigating those risks? That's the two most important questions. The third is really around regulations, because especially in public companies or personal information or health information type companies, they need to ask and understand, are they compliant with relevant regulations?
Yeah.
Do they know the regulations, and are they complying with them? And how do they know they are? Is it just somebody inside the company that's telling them they're compliant, or are they getting an outside view through audit that's telling them they are compliant, that can be certified? And then the last thing is how prepared are they for a cyber incident? That's that incident response plan. And that's that opportunity to do tabletop exercises that are executive exercises, and being able for the board to understand, if there is an incident, where are they in this whole process too? Because they need to know, because they have that ultimate responsibility for oversight of the enterprise risk management program. So that's a lot condensed into a couple of things there.
Yeah, it does seem, I think it does definitely seem like a lot, but then at the same time, this is the kind of response that organizations have to start thinking about today, because right. I mean, literally in 1 year time, if all of these measures aren't adopted, it's a little bit scary to imagine where security stance will be if security cannot follow the technological development. So all of this are absolutely necessary. And you've built and led security teams across multiple organizations, Patrick. What's philosophy on hiring and developing security talent? How do you identify people who can grow with the rapidly changing threat landscape?
Yeah, I'm always going to hire for the person before the role, so to speak. So I'm hiring for their level of motivation, their level of enthusiasm, what potential they have. Skills are oftentimes easy to find. There are lots of people that have skills, but it's the other things that make them the most valuable. So, I'm looking for character or work ethic. I'm looking for curiosity. In the cyber world, if you don't have intense curiosity, then you're not going to ask the next question. You're not going to ask the 5 questions about why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening, to get to the root cause? So curiosity and adaptability are way high. Critical thinking, are they asking questions, or are they just making assumptions? Because we don't do assumptions. Their communication skill, how simply can they explain complex risks? And obviously you want some hands-on experience. How do they deal with pressure? Do they bounce back from setbacks? Those are pressure kinds of things. Yeah. And then ultimately, do they have an ethical mindset? And those are the things I'm really looking for, which will tip the scale, because I guarantee you, for every job we put out there, we could get 100 applications that have the skills and the experience. But do they have these other things?
Yeah. I'm sure that skills just set the benchmark for the entry, and then whatever comes after that is actually what distinguishes one person from another. And as you said, you have to be so situationally aware and agile, and security is probably the industry where you have to be the most agile as you can possibly be.
Right.
Yeah. And if we are looking at the newer generation entering the workforce, how do you adapt security awareness training for people who've grown up digital but may not understand enterprise level risks?
Well, and I think we've been doing security awareness training wrong from the beginning, frankly. We've always taught security awareness from the point of view of, you're at work, you're sitting at your desk, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, people don't usually take what they learn at work home with them. But if you teach them, this is how you keep yourself and your family personally safe in the cyber world. These are good practices you should be doing with your family, and you make it personal. Guess what? They will bring that to the office with them. So we've been teaching it from the wrong point of view, because they don't feel as invested as if it's helping themselves and their family. So I think we need to change that character a little bit too. And I also disagree, which most people do, with this idea that once a year you get an email, you got to do an hour of security awareness training, and then you check the box and you go about your business. I'm an advocate of and like building systems where, every week you get some little thing, an email, a video, a little gamification question or something. And every one of those that you participate in, it accumulates time to your transcript. And you set a standard for the whole year that says, if by 30 days before the end of the year, you have accumulated, pick a number, 2 hours of awareness training or participation, then you're good because you've done it. You've done what we needed you to do. If, however, you've done nothing for 9 months or 10 months, and now we come up to the last month or so, and you haven't done anything, then we are going to send you that email that says, you now must do these 2 hours of training. Otherwise, it has an impact on your performance review.
Yeah.
Because you do it all through the year. So I think we need to get to that accumulated training and do bits and bytes all throughout the year so that we can, make it simple. Yeah. That's the two ways we need to change training.
Yeah, it almost reminds me when you talk about this more personalized approach of training, like targeted ads, as we receive so many of them. Why can't we do the same when it comes to security? If you being so targeted, and although we are talking about enterprise level protection, at the end of the day, our personal lives are so interlinked with our corporate lives that you just want to be, as you rightfully mentioned, influence the emotional side, family side, that you'd want to bring it to your professional side as well.
Yeah, why are we sending out little personal, little targeted Snapchat-like or TikTok-like or Facebook Reel-like things on a regular basis that somebody clicks on and they get 30 seconds or a minute and they go, oh, wow, that was fun. And then they move on. That's the way to do training.
Yeah, I agree. In your 30-year experience, what are the top 3 lessons you'd like to impart to our audience?
So I'm going to make it 4 just because I have 4 and it's not my own. I got it from a book that I love and I teach all my teams this and I use it all the time. I try to live this way too. And it's from a book that a gentleman named Don Miguel Ruiz wrote called The 4 Agreements. And there are 4 things that you should do. And again, I teach the team this. Be impeccable with your word. So in other words, tell the truth, speak with integrity and say only what you mean. The second one is don't take anything personally. Because other people's actions, they're not a reflection of you. That reflects on them. And so let them own that and don't take it personally and get upset about it. The third is don't make assumptions. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to communicate clearly. It's okay to develop an observation that is a result of all of that. But don't just make an assumption. And then finally, always do your best. So your best changes from moment to moment, but always honor that you're trying to do the best that you can do with what you know. And those 4 things to me are, you can't go wrong by doing those.
Yeah, I think so many of these great lessons, inherently, we understand them and we know them, but they always need a constant reminder of where we stand. And I think it's so great to reread these kind of books. They just constantly remind you, as you mentioned at the start of the podcast, is going back to the basics. It's going back to identifying, okay, what are the minimum requirements that have to be filled in, or whether it's your life approach or security approach. So this is all great. Patrick, we have this little tradition on our podcast where typically our previous guest would ask question to our next guest. So our previous guest asked this question to you. Would you rather lose the trust of your team or the confidence of your board?
So the selfish answer is the confidence of the board. But personally, I would rather not lose the trust of my team. I would rather lose confidence from the board than I would the trust of my team, although that's probably a job-ending result. So hopefully you can keep both.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is that? What is the rationale behind it?
Well, because in my mind, without the team, you're nothing. And it's the same with most companies if they realize it early enough. Without the people that are doing, the sales and doing the marketing and doing the administration and doing the engineering and IT and everything else, they have no company. And so to sacrifice your team for the sake of, first of all, a board that loses confidence, I don't know what you'd have to do that and still be doing the right things with your team. But without the team, you don't have anything. So I tend to lean towards that side.
Yeah. I mean, that completely makes sense because at the end of the day, there will be no leaders if there are no people working and making the wheels move. So I completely understand where you're coming from. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
I might ask something like, if there was one mindset or philosophy that over their course of time helped them to lead through uncertainty, what was that change in mindset that helped them lead through uncertainty, and why did it help them?
That's a great question. I keep on thinking of that CrowdStrike incident that took place, and I'm just thinking, you have to have such a peaceful mindset to handle situations like this. But this is a great question. Well, Patrick, it's been such a great conversation. We've covered so many areas, whether it comes to building the right team and making sure you have the trust of people you're working with, or building the right security culture, the way you're supposed to be adopting to the new tools coming in or not adopting to new tools coming in, the way you're supposed to be approaching agents or just sticking to fundamentals. I think all of this are just such great lessons for people, whether they're looking to become a CISO one day or just looking to enter into cyberspace. So I really loved our conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.